The silence in our home had become a physical presence, a dense, heavy fog that filled every room, muffling the echoes of a life that once felt vibrant and real. I sat at the worn oak kitchen table, a relic from a happier time, its surface etched with the ghosts of family meals and shared laughter. The only sound was the relentless metronomic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from my parents, now sounding less like a marker of time and more like the countdown to an inevitable collapse. My husband, Robert, had just returned from another business dinner. He didn't just look tired, he looked hollowed out, haunted by a secret weight that bowed his shoulders and etched new lines of fatigue around his eyes. He moved through our familiar space like a stranger, his actions performative and drained. "Exhausted, Eleanor," he mumbled, his voice a gravelly whisper as he tossed his expensive wool jacket onto the sofa. He loosened his tie with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, as if freeing himself from a noose. "The partners from out of town, they're relentless. Don't wait up." He didn't even glance my way. He just trudged up the stairs, and a few moments later, I heard the familiar groan of the bed springs as he collapsed onto a mattress, still in his clothes. The faint, familiar scent of his cologne, a spicy, expensive aroma I'd chosen for him years ago, trailed behind him, but it was now tainted with something new, something alien. A cloying, sweet floral perfume that hung in the air like a brazen, mocking confession. A few minutes later, the low hum of his snoring began to rumble through the house. A sound that had once been the comforting soundtrack to my nights now felt like a derisive lullaby for a fool. I rose from my chair, moving with the quiet, practiced grace of a wife of 25 years, and began my nightly ritual of tidying his discarded life. His jacket, his wallet, his cell phone, his sleek laptop he barely knew how to use. The phone's screen was still illuminated, casting a pale blue glow onto the table. A new email notification glowed on the lock screen. I frowned. Robert never used email. "Eleanor, all that digital nonsense is for young people. I'd rather just pick up the phone," he'd always say. But there it was, a digital ghost from a life I didn't know he was leading. A morbid, chilling curiosity seized me. With a trembling finger, I tapped the screen. It unlocked. He'd never bothered with a passcode, a testament to the trust he never thought would be broken. The message was short, a handful of words that detonated in the quiet room, shattering my world into a million sharp fragments. "You were incredible tonight, Daddy." It was followed by a single crimson heart emoji, a symbol of intimacy that felt like a physical blow to my chest. I froze, the blood draining from my face. Daddy. The word echoed in the silent kitchen, obscene and terrifying. Who called him that, and in such an intimately affectionate tone? My thumb, slick with a cold sweat, swiped down, searching for more, a name, a clue, anything. But there was nothing, just a sender's address, a jumbled string of letters and numbers that offered no answers, only a deeper, more profound dread. A shiver, cold and bone-deep, racked my body. It felt like a door I never knew existed had been blown open, revealing a hidden chamber of my life filled with shadows and lies. I glanced toward the staircase, half expecting him to be standing there, but all I heard was his steady, oblivious snore. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I quickly placed the phone back exactly where I'd found it, my hands shaking so violently I nearly fumbled it. I continued my cleaning on autopilot, my movements mechanical. I gathered his clothes for the laundry, my hands mechanically checking his pockets. In the right pocket of his trousers, my fingers brushed against a folded, crisp piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from the Gilded Fork, an impossibly trendy and expensive steakhouse in Oakville, dated that very night. My breath hitched. Oakville? He had told me his meeting was in Burlington, nearly an hour's drive in the opposite direction. Robert hated the traffic to Burlington. Oakville, on the other hand, was where his beloved sister lived. He had countless fond memories of the place, a fact he mentioned often. The receipt was for a party of 2, one bottle of 98 Silver Oak Cabernet, a wine that he had bought for our 15th anniversary, a night that I had cherished and remembered in vivid detail. The main courses, a prime filet mignon, and a truffle lobster pasta. I tried to recall the last time Robert had taken me to a place like that. Maybe 5 years ago, when my boutique had its first profitable year. The memory, once so bright, now felt tarnished, a faded photograph in a scrapbook of deceit. With a silent, grim determination, I took out my own phone and snapped pictures of the receipt and the email. I didn't want to believe it, but a wife's intuition, a woman's intuition of 25 years, is a deep, primal knowing something was terribly wrong. My hands were trembling, not just with anger, but with a profound, existential fear. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the first stones of my life's foundation crumble away. I needed air, or perhaps more evidence to confirm the nightmare. I walked to the garage, the fluorescent light flickering on with a harsh buzz. Robert's SUV sat there, still warm, the air inside thick with the smell of leather, gasoline, and that faint, sweet, intrusive perfume. I opened the passenger door. A small, cold dread gripped my stomach. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began to search. The driver's side yielded nothing, just loose change, a crumpled gas station napkin, an empty water bottle. But as I reached into the glove compartment, my fingers brushed against something plastic and slippery. I pulled it out, and my heart stuttered to a halt. It was a tube of personal lubricant, half used, with a telltale dried residue around the cap, a sticky, damning piece of evidence that seemed to glow in the dim light. Robert and I hadn't been intimate in years. He'd always claimed his drive had faded with age, that he was too stressed, too tired, a familiar refrain that I, the understanding wife, had accepted. So what was this for?
The question echoed in the silent garage, each syllable a hammer blow to my fragile reality. I felt paralyzed, but a cold, survivalist instinct took over. I placed it back exactly where I'd found it. I wiped my hands on my jeans, scrubbing at them as if I could erase the feeling of the betrayal from my skin. I continued my search, more carefully now, more methodically. Under the back seat, I found a few crumpled napkins. I picked one up and flinched. It was soaked in that same sweet floral perfume, a scent that was not a man's and was certainly not my own soft signature scent of lavender and vanilla. This was alien, defiant, a vulgar shout of infidelity in the quiet sanctuary of my garage. I took photos of everything, the lubricant, the napkins, as if I could somehow capture the scent and the shame in a digital image. I closed the car door and went back inside, the weight of the evidence pressing down on me, heavier than any shipment of fabric I had ever hauled for the boutique. I sat back at the kitchen table, my hands still shaking. I picked up Robert's phone again. This time, I was a woman on a mission. I checked his text messages, only dry, work-related chats with his business partners. His call history was clean. His email inbox was pristine, save for that one monstrous message. The sent and draft folders were empty. It was all too clean, too perfect, Suspiciously so. He was being careful, a master of lies. My initial shock was now crystallizing into a cold, hard rage, and with it, a new, more dangerous emotion began to stir. A desperate, burning need for the truth, no matter how ugly, and a desire to make the liar pay. The next morning, as a pale dawn light filtered through the kitchen curtains, I was already awake. A ghost in my own home. The images of the lubricant, the restaurant receipt, and that email swirled in my head like a venomous carousel. I stood at the stove, my hands busy but my mind 1,000 miles away. I made breakfast, 2 fried eggs, toast, a cup of the strong black coffee Robert liked. I had barely slept. Robert came down, his hair disheveled, his eyes puffy and groggy. He sat at the table, gulped his coffee, and set the cup down half empty. "Big day today," he said, his voice still husky with sleep. It was a rehearsed line, one he'd used countless times before. He didn't look at me. "Meeting ran late last night, and now I've got to close the deal. Probably be home late again." He was so practiced, so casual. It made my skin crawl. I nodded, forcing a thin, strained smile. All I wanted to do was scream. Where? With whom? In Oakville again? But I held my rage, a silent, smoldering fire, and simply replied, "All right, drive safe." He stood, gave me a perfunctory pat on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than affection, and left. The door clicked shut, leaving me in a silence that was now filled with a monstrous, growing certainty. I cleared the table and washed the dishes. The rhythmic motion a small anchor in the storm of my emotions. I couldn't just sit there, inventing theories. I needed cold, hard evidence. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Beatrice Croft, a fiercely intelligent and well-connected friend who had helped me navigate the business licensing for my boutique years ago. Over a bottle of wine once, she had told me, "Eleanor, if that handsome husband of yours ever steps out of line, I know a guy, the best, discreet as a ghost." I never imagined I'd need to make that call. My finger hovered over the dial button for a moment before I pressed it, each ringtone a hammer blow to my pride. "Beatrice, it's Eleanor. I need that number. The discreet guy you mentioned." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that spoke volumes. "Eleanor? Sweetheart, what's happened? Did Robert do something?" I sighed, the sound shaky and weak. I couldn't voice the humiliation, not yet. "I just need to know the truth, Bea. Can you help me?" Beatrice, a woman who valued action over sympathy, agreed immediately. "Of course, darling. I'll text you his details right now. His name is Silas. Silas Thorne. He's expensive, but he's worth every penny." An hour later, my phone buzzed with a new contact. A message followed shortly after. "Mrs. Vance, Beatrice Croft referred you. My condolences on your situation. Please meet me today at 1 p.m. at the Quiet Corner Cafe on Elm Street. I will help you find your truth. S. Thorne." The message was curt, professional, and it felt like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. At precisely 1 o'clock, I walked into the Quiet Corner Cafe, a small, unassuming place with worn Persian rugs and the rich, comforting aroma of freshly ground coffee. I chose a booth in the very back, shrouded in shadow. Silas Thorne arrived exactly on time. He was a man who blended into his surroundings, average height, average build, dressed in a simple, well-tailored gray suit. His eyes, however, were extraordinary, a pale, piercing blue that seemed to see everything, to absorb every detail in a single sweeping glance. I handed him a flash drive with the photos I'd taken. "This is all I have. I think my husband is having an affair." The words tasted like ash on my tongue. Thorne nodded, plugging the drive into a small tablet he produced from his briefcase. He reviewed each image, his face an impassive mask. He made neat, precise notes in a leather-bound notebook.
"Mrs. Vance, I understand. I will begin surveillance on Mr. Vance this afternoon. You will have updates.
Do not do anything to alter your routine or arouse suspicion." His voice was calm, measured, devoid of judgment. "I just want to know the truth," I whispered, tears finally welling in my eyes, "whatever it is." He gave a single, curt nod. "The truth is my specialty. Go home, Mrs. Vance. Try to rest." I left the cafe and walked through the bustling streets, but I felt a loneliness so profound it was like a physical ache. 25 years of marriage, a lifetime built on a foundation of trust that was now crumbling to dust beneath my feet. Robert had been my rock, my anchor, and now I was hiring a stranger to shadow him. The irony was a bitter poison. I felt like a character in a sordid drama, one I never auditioned for. That evening, I was at my boutique, surrounded by the comforting sense of fine wool and lavender sachets, mechanically going over inventory lists when my phone vibrated on the glass countertop. A message from Silas Thorne. My heart leapt into my throat, a frantic pounding rhythm. I opened it. It was a photograph. Robert, in the light blue button-down shirt I'd ironed for him that morning, was entering an elegant bistro, and he was holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in on the image and the world dropped out under my feet. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a sophisticated emerald green dress I'd never seen before, her blonde hair styled in an elegant updo, her makeup flawless. They didn't look like father-in-law and daughter-in-law, they looked like a couple deeply in love. Their bodies angled toward each other, their fingers intertwined, sharing a secret smile. I sank onto the stool behind the counter, my hand trembling so violently the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. Chloe. How was this possible? At family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, she and Robert were always polite and distant, barely exchanging more than a few pleasantries. I now realized it was a masterful act, a performance designed for my benefit, for everyone's benefit. Another photo arrived. They were seated at a secluded, candle-lit table. Chloe was leaning forward, laughing at something he said, her hand resting on his forearm. Robert was gazing at her with a look of tender adoration that stole the breath from my lungs. In 25 years, I had never seen him look at me like that, not even in the early days when I was the young, vibrant girl from Niagara-on-the-Lake who had captured his heart. That look, which I had believed was reserved for our private world, was now being given to her. Later that night, a video file arrived. It was after midnight. I plugged in my headphones, a desperate attempt to contain the devastating truth, and pressed play. The video was taken from a distance, but was crystal clear. Chloe leaned in and whispered something in Robert's ear. He threw his head back and laughed, a full, unguarded, joyous sound that was a stranger to me. Then they rose to leave. Robert, ever the gentleman, held her chair and then the restaurant door for her, his hand resting on the small of her back with a possessiveness that made me feel ill. I watched the video again and again, a form of self-flagellation, each viewing another twist of the knife in my heart. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, whom I had welcomed into our family with open arms, whom I had taught how to make Robert's favorite beef bourguignon, and Robert, the man I had built my life with whom I had raised a son. What were they doing behind my back, behind my son Mark's back? The questions were a tidal wave threatening to drown me. I saved all the photos and the video to a secure cloud drive, noting every detail, dates, times, the name of the bistro. My hands worked on autopilot, but my mind was reeling. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable, a mountain of proof I could no longer ignore. I stayed in the boutique long into the night, surrounded by beautiful things that now felt hollow and meaningless. I remembered when I first opened the shop how Robert had built the shelving units with his own hands and how we'd celebrated with cheap champagne after the first big sale. It all seemed like a distant memory, a beautiful lie I had lived for too long.
The next morning, I was in the back room of the boutique, finalizing an order for a new line of Italian silk, when my phone vibrated. Another message from Silas Thorne. My heart took a deep, steadying breath and opened the message. A new series of photos loaded. The first showed Robert in his typical business attire, leaving a sleek, modern office building downtown. By his side was Chloe, dressed in a sharp, professional pencil skirt and blouse, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, her makeup flawless. They were walking close together, their bodies almost touching, a united front. The next photo showed them standing under the awning of the Royal Elm Hotel, a lavish 5-star establishment with a gleaming brass and glass entrance. I zoomed in, desperately searching for any sign that this was innocent, but there was none. They looked comfortable, familiar, a part of a shared world from which I was utterly excluded. Then came another video. I pressed play, my heart thundering against my ribs. The shot was from a significant distance, but using a powerful lens, but the image was clear. Robert and Chloe were on a 4th-floor balcony of the hotel. His arm was wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. She rested her head on his shoulder, her hair blowing softly in the breeze, and then, as if to erase any last shred of doubt, they shared a kiss. It wasn't a brief peck, it was slow, intimate, and filled with a passion that felt like a physical assault. I replayed those few seconds frame by frame, each image searing itself into my soul, a slow, agonizing descent into hell. The balcony door opened slightly and Chloe emerged to hug him, her face radiant with a happiness I recognized from young love. I slumped into my chair, gripping the edge of the desk to keep from falling apart. Silas Thorne wrote, "They have taken a suite for the afternoon. It appears they intend to stay the evening, continuing surveillance." I read the message over and over, my throat tight with unshed tears. Just that morning, Robert had texted me, "Eleanor, have to entertain clients from out of town tonight. Don't wait up. Get some rest, my dear." The tone was sweet, caring, just as it had always been. But now I knew it was all a lie, meticulously constructed. Clients from out of town. He was in a 5-star hotel with our daughter-in-law. I opened my encrypted hard drive and saved every photo, every video. Each time I hit save, I forced myself to look at the images, to sear the reality of his betrayal into my mind. In the video, Robert's gaze toward Chloe was so tender, the way he tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. It was a gesture he'd once reserved for me, a lifetime ago. I remembered family dinners, all of us sitting around the table. Chloe always made a point of sitting as far from Robert as possible. Sometimes she'd even make a faintly disparaging comment about his opinions. Mark would joke, "Mom, I think Chloe's allergic to Dad's old-fashioned ideas." And I had believed it. I thought they simply didn't connect.
Now I understood it was all a farce, a carefully choreographed dance of deception. They had acted their parts perfectly in front of me, in front of Mark, in front of the entire world. I felt like the ultimate fool, a blind wife betrayed by the two people I should have been able to trust most. I replied to Thorne, "Thank you. I need to know everything." He answered simply, "Understood." That night, the house felt more foreign than ever, a museum of lies. I went to my desk and took out a thick, heavy stock envelope. I printed all the evidence, photos of them leaving the office building, entering the hotel, on the balcony, every damning frame of the video. I arranged them in a meticulous timeline, sealed the envelope, and hid it at the back of my filing cabinet, behind old tax returns. I looked at a framed photo on my desk of the 4 of us, Robert, Chloe, Mark, and me at Mark's graduation. Chloe was beaming, her arm linked through Mark's, while Robert stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, looking every inch the proud patriarch. Now all I wanted to do was smash the glass and tear the image of their smiling, duplicitous faces to shreds. The next morning, just before dawn, I heard the front door open softly. Robert stumbled in, reeking of expensive whiskey and that same sweet perfume.
He slurred. The client was a tough negotiator, Ellie. Had to drink him under the table. I'm wiped. I was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, watching him perform his pathetic play while feeling like he was grinding salt into an open wound. I replied, "You should rest. I have that conference call tomorrow." He nodded, gave me a clumsy pat on the arm, as if I were a piece of furniture, and dragged himself up to the bedroom. Minutes later, he was snoring peacefully, as if he hadn't just shattered our family. When I was sure he was asleep, my phone vibrated. It was Silas Thorne. "Mrs. Vance," his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I managed to record a conversation in the hotel's underground parking garage, specialized equipment. They were unaware. Sending the file now." My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. "Thank you, Silas. Send it." Minutes later, an audio file appeared. I put on my headphones, sat at the kitchen table, and pressed play. The first voice I heard was Chloe's. It was cold, calculating, utterly unlike the sweet girl I thought I knew. "We need to move faster with the power of attorney papers, Robert. I want that boutique chain. I want that quaint little house. I want that old woman out." I felt a blow to my solar plexus, the air rushing from my lungs. That old woman. Then came Robert's voice, deep and reassuring, but now it sounded like the rumble of a monster. "Patience, my darling. Eleanor is oblivious. She trusts me implicitly. It's all in hand. The lawyer has drawn up the documents. A few more signatures, and it will all be ours." It wasn't just an affair. It was a coup. They weren't just cheating on me. They were planning to systematically steal everything I had built. My boutique, my home, my financial security. Robert had never taken an interest in the business side of my shop. He'd never dealt with the suppliers, never managed the books. And now he and Chloe were plotting to take it all. To leave me with nothing. I almost broke down then, but a terrifying calm descended upon me. I copied the audio file to the secure drive, labeling it with precision. The cold, hard stone in my chest was now glowing with a white-hot heat. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about survival. The next morning, as I was preparing coffee in the boutique's small kitchen, my phone buzzed again. More photos from Thorne, taken with a powerful telephoto lens through the slightly ajar curtains of the hotel suite. Robert and Chloe were sitting at a small table, a thick stack of legal documents between them. Chloe was holding a red pen, circling clauses and making notes with intense concentration. Robert, beside her, was nodding, a smug, satisfied smile on his face. Thorne wrote, "I have identified the law firm. They are using a contact there to expedite the asset transfer under the guise of standard estate planning. Investigating further." I zoomed in on the photo. I could make out the letterhead of a firm I didn't recognize. These weren't simple lies. This was a cold, calculated plan to dismantle my life. I sat there, surrounded by bolts of beautiful fabric, and felt the walls closing in. I reopened the audio file, listening to every vile word. "That old woman," the phrase echoed. I remembered the days when Chloe had first started dating Mark, how she'd come to me for advice, how I'd hugged her and told her she was the daughter I never had. I thought she was part of our family, that she would be the woman to build a future with my son. And Robert, the man I had loved since I was a girl, who had sworn to cherish and protect me, they had made a mockery of me, a laughingstock who still believed in loyalty and love. A regular customer, Mrs. Abernathy, came in, her bell-like voice breaking my dark reverie. "Eleanor, darling, the new shipment of cashmere is divine. Your business is just flourishing. You must be so proud." I forced my lips into a smile. "Thank you, Dorothy. I'm doing my best." But inside, I was screaming. I wondered what she would think if she knew the truth. Would she see a strong businesswoman or just a pathetic, betrayed wife? I wrapped Mrs. Abernathy's purchase, said goodbye, and sank into my chair, my head in my hands. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a silent, frigid rage solidified within me, cold and sharp as a diamond. That night at dinner, I sat across from Robert in our dining room, under the soft glow of the chandelier. He ate and talked in a monotone about market fluctuations and difficult clients.
Eleanor, I'll need you to sign some papers later this week, he said casually, cutting into his steak. Just some routine estate planning updates the lawyer sent over. Boring stuff, but best to keep things tidy. I picked at my salad, but in my head I could only hear Chloe's voice from the recording. We need to move faster with the power of attorney papers. I gave him a thin, tired smile. Of course, Robert. I'll look at them when I have a moment. I'm just so tired lately. He nodded, took a sip of his wine, and looked at me as if everything were perfectly normal. But I knew that behind that bland facade was a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. Robert had a few more glasses of wine. His face grew flushed, and he began slurring his words about a particularly stubborn business associate. I nodded, as if listening, but inside a plan was beginning to form, cold and precise. I wanted to scream, "Do you think I'm that stupid?" But I held my tongue. When he rose, staggering slightly, and announced he was going to bed, I cleared the table, my every move slow and deliberate, containing the icy fury that was building inside me. He threw himself on the bed, snoring almost immediately, and left his car keys on the nightstand. They gleamed under the lamplight. I stared at them, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. This was my chance, my moment. I entered the bedroom silently, a ghost in my own home. I took the keys, their cold metal feeling like an instrument of justice in my hand, and went straight to the garage. The night was utterly still. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam illuminated Robert's SUV. I opened the passenger door. The smell of his cologne and her perfume was fainter now, but still present. I opened the glove compartment, and there it was, the tube of lubricant. The cap was loose again, with fresh residue around the nozzle. They had used it again. It was a confirmation, a final, disgusting insult. I took the tube to my laundry room sink, placed it on the counter, and scrubbed my hands with lemon-scented soap until they were raw. The fresh, clean scent did little to calm the storm inside me, but it helped me focus. I opened a cabinet and took out a tube of clear, industrial-strength epoxy adhesive, the kind I'd once used to repair a broken mannequin in the boutique. A tool of my trade was about to become a weapon of my revenge. With meticulous care, I unscrewed the cap of the lubricant and squeezed every last drop of its contents into the trash. Then, using a small funnel, I filled the empty tube with the thick, clear epoxy adhesive. I wiped the nozzle clean, gave it a gentle shake to mix the two-part adhesive, and tested it. A small, clear blob emerged, indistinguishable from the original substance. Perfect. I placed the booby-trapped tube back in the exact same spot in the glove compartment, adjusted the floor mat, and closed the car door. Before leaving, I opened the trunk. Among some crumpled grocery bags and an old blanket, I found a single, unused condom. My heart clenched, but I was beyond surprise. I took a picture, adding it to my collection. Back in the house, I returned the keys to the nightstand. I picked up a book and sat in the living room armchair, pretending to read. The words were a blur. My mind was racing, finalizing the details of my plan. I thought of Mark, my son, who believed he was happily married. How could I ever tell him that his wife and his own father were conspiring against us? I thought of my boutique, of 25 years of work, of all the fights I'd had with Robert to defend my dream. He'd never understood it, and now I knew he'd only been waiting for the chance to take it from me. An hour later, Robert woke up and stumbled downstairs for water. He saw the keys on the counter and didn't bat an eye.
"Still up, Ellie?" he asked groggily. "Just reading a bit," I replied. "Finish your water and go back to bed." He nodded, drank, and returned to the bedroom, his snores resuming almost immediately. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. This man, who had once promised me a lifetime, was now planning my destruction. But he didn't know that the trap was already set. At dawn, I was already in the boutique's kitchen kneading dough for the lavender shortbread cookies I sometimes gave to favored clients. I pressed into the dough with all my strength, channeling my rage into every movement. When I returned home for breakfast, I maintained my calm facade. Robert was already up, sipping his black coffee. "Robert," I said calmly, "I have to go to Kingston tomorrow to meet a new fabric supplier. It's a long drive. I'm sure I'll be home very late. Can you fend for yourself for dinner?" I watched him out of my corner of eye. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, I saw it. Not concern, but pure, unadulterated relief. A spark of excitement. "Kingston, that's quite a trip," he said, reaching over to pat my hand with feigned tenderness. "Don't you worry about a thing. Go. Take care of business. I'll be fine." But that spark in his eyes, that slight, almost imperceptible curve of his lips, was all the confirmation I needed. He wanted me gone. I smiled and nodded. "Thanks. I'll call you when I'm on my way back." He took another sip of coffee, then stood, saying he had to get to the office early. As he left, I saw he'd left his phone on the table again. The screen lit up with a missed call. The name that flashed was CM. My blood ran cold. Chloe Myers. Before I could move, Robert hurried back in, snatched the phone, and quickly locked the screen. "Forgot this," he mumbled with a forced smile, and he was gone. I stood there, watching the door close, feeling the final brittle thread of my old life snap. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That day, I worked like an automaton, but my mind was solely focused on the final phase of my plan. I couldn't let them continue their charade. I needed to hear from their own mouths their plans, and I needed to orchestrate their humiliation in a way they could never escape. That night, I pretended to be exhausted. "I have to be up early to beat the traffic," I told Robert. "I'm going to sleep." He nodded, giving me that same patronizing pat. "Rest well, Eleanor. Drive safely tomorrow."
I lay down and closed my eyes, but I sharpened my hearing, attuned to every sound in the house. Close to midnight, when Robert's snoring ceased, I heard him get out of bed. The faint light of his phone screen illuminated the darkness. He left the room, thinking I was asleep. I slowly got up and followed him on silent feet, hiding in the shadows of the hallway. He stood by the large window in the living room, the city lights twinkling behind him. He put the phone to his ear and spoke in a low, eager voice. "Yes, darling, of course. Come to the house tomorrow. We won't have to hide in hotels anymore. Eleanor is going to Kingston for the day. She'll be back late. Yes, I'll be waiting." I stood there in the darkness, feeling my blood turn to ice. They weren't just meeting in secret. They were planning to defile my home, to turn the house I'd made into a home, into their illicit love nest. I returned to the bedroom, opened a drawer, and took out an old digital voice recorder Mark had used in university. I checked the batteries, inserted a new memory card, and set it to continuous record. I hid it on the bookshelf next to the bed, carefully positioning it behind a framed photo of Robert and me on our wedding day. The irony was not lost on me. Before returning to bed, I made one final trip to the kitchen. I placed a small iron skillet on the stove and filled it with a half-inch of cheap vegetable oil. I tied a long, almost invisible piece of fishing line to the stove's igniter knob. I ran the line out the slightly open kitchen window and tied it to a heavy ceramic pot on the patio outside. A simple, remote-controlled smoke bomb. I was ready. I woke at 5 a.m. when it was still dark,
The house was silent except for Robert's steady snoring. I was in the kitchen, dressed for my trip, a large purse on my shoulder. I entered the bedroom and gently shook him. "I'm leaving now for Kingston," I said softly. "The traffic will be terrible if I wait." He opened his eyes, bleary and unfocused. All right. Be careful, Ellie. Call me," he slurred, before burying his face back into the pillow. I looked at the man I had once loved, now lying there oblivious to the reckoning that awaited him. I turned and left. Instead of driving to Kingston, I went directly to Beatrice Croft's house, which had a perfect view of my own. She opened the door, took one look at my face and my purse, and understood immediately. "Eleanor, come in. The coffee is fresh." She led me to her sunroom, which offered a panoramic view of my street. She handed me a steaming mug and didn't ask any questions. She simply sat with me, a silent sentinel of support. Around 10 o'clock, a sleek rideshare car pulled up in front of my house. Chloe stepped out. She was wearing a simple but elegant cream-colored sweater dress and carried a large tote bag. She looked up and down the street before practically skipping up my front walk. Robert opened the door before she could even knock, pulled her inside quickly, and shut the door. My heart was a drum against my ribs. It was time. I turned on the app connected to the hidden recorder. The sound came through my headphones clearly. Laughter, the clink of glasses, footsteps moving toward the staircase. Then I heard Robert's voice, thick with desire. "Finally, we have the place to ourselves." Chloe giggled. "I've been waiting for this all week. Is the old bat definitely gone?" I bit my lip until I tasted blood, holding back the wave of nausea and rage. Then came the sound of the bed creaking, followed by other sounds I had no desire to hear. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and counted to 60. Just a little longer, I told myself. A few minutes later, a sudden, sharp cry of alarm came through the headphones. "Robert, what is this? It's sticking. Oh my God, I can't move." Robert's voice, panicked and confused. What? What are you talking about? Stop moving." "It's burning. We're stuck together. Do something." "I can't. It's like cement." I smiled, a cold, hard smile. I picked up the remote trigger from my makeshift device, a simple garage door opener I'd wired to the fishing line. I pressed the button. From Beatrice's window, I saw it happen. The fishing line went taut, yanking the stove's igniter knob to the on position. The element glowed red, and a moment later, the oil in the skillet burst into flames. Thick, black, acrid smoke began billowing out of my kitchen window, pouring into the calm morning air like a distress signal. Beatrice gasped, "Eleanor, your kitchen!" Almost immediately, a neighbor across the street came out onto his porch. "Fire!" he yelled. "Someone call 911. The Vance house is on fire." The neighborhood, once quiet, erupted into chaos. People spilled out of their homes, pointing and shouting. Someone already had their phone out, dialing emergency services. I stayed perfectly still, my coffee cup steady in my hand. Inside my headphones, the sounds of panic were escalating. "Robert, the smoke! I smell smoke! Oh my God, we're stuck! We can't get out! Do something! Break free! I can't! It's like cement!" It was a symphony of their own making. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, culminating in the arrival of a massive red fire engine that skidded to a halt in front of my house. My breath caught in my throat as I saw my son Mark, in his full fire chief gear, leap from the passenger seat, his face a mask of professional concern. "All right, let's move. Hose line ready? Check for occupants," he barked to his team, his voice firm and authoritative through the app I still had open. The smoke was now pouring out in thick black columns, making the situation look far more dire than it was. Mark took a sledgehammer from one of his crew and with a powerful swing shattered my front door. The sound of splintering wood echoed down the street. The audio from the bedroom was a chaotic mix of screams, curses, and the sound of frantic, futile struggling. Mark's voice, suddenly sharp with confusion and horror, cut through the noise. "What the— Dad, Chloe?" I could picture the scene perfectly. My son, in his heroic uniform, standing in the doorway of his parents' bedroom, finding his father and his wife naked, entangled, and glued together in a grotesque tableau of betrayal. A firefighter behind him muttered, "Holy shit." Another couldn't suppress a nervous, shocked giggle. Mark's voice roared, a mixture of command and utter devastation. "Get back! Everyone, get back! Miller, Johnson, secure the scene, now!" But it was too late. The entire fire crew had seen. The neighbors, craning their necks from behind the fire truck, had seen enough to understand. The whispers began, quickly growing into a roar of scandalized gossip. A firefighter ran out, addressing Mark. "Chief, it's contained. It's a small oil fire on the stove. Extinguished. No structural damage." But Mark wasn't listening. He was still in that bedroom, frozen by the horrific truth. The firefighters, after a moment of stunned hesitation, had to do their job. They wrapped Robert and Chloe in bed sheets, a pathetic attempt at preserving their modesty, and with considerable difficulty maneuvered them onto 2 stretchers that were then carried out of the house and into the full view of the gathered neighborhood. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted into a cacophony of gasps, shouts, and derisive laughter. Is that Robert Vance and his son's wife? My God, they're stuck together? What a disgusting disgrace. I watched, my face a mask of feigned shock and horror, as my husband and my daughter-in-law were loaded into an ambulance, their faces pale with a mixture of pain and utter profound humiliation. Beatrice, beside me, was silently recording the entire spectacle on her phone. I walked out of Beatrice's house, pretending to have just run up the street from a non-existent taxi. "My house! What happened? Mark, is everyone okay?" I cried, pushing through the crowd. Mark turned to look at me, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a pain so deep it seemed to have aged him a decade in minutes. "Mom, it's Dad and Chloe," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Mom, it's Dad and Chloe." I rushed to him and pulled him into a fierce hug, letting my own real tears of grief, of anger, of relief, finally fall. "I know, baby. I know." We stood there for a long moment, mother and son amidst the ruins of our family, while the world watched and whispered. The aftermath was a blur of stark, painful clarity. Robert and Chloe were taken to the hospital where they were eventually and painfully separated by medical staff. I went to the hospital, not out of concern, but to deliver the final blow. I walked into the hospital room where they lay in separate beds, turned away from each other in shame. A nurse handed me 2 tubes of medicinal cream for their skin. "This will help with the irritation, Mrs. Vance," she said softly, her eyes full of pity. The moment she turned her back, I made the switch, pulling 2 identical tubes filled with a potent mixture of habanero pepper extract and capsaicin cream from my purse. I placed 1 tube on each of their bedside tables. "I thought you might need this," I said, my voice cold and flat. I turned and left. I didn't need to wait for the screams that erupted minutes later. I could imagine them perfectly. The final, stinging note of my revenge. Later, Mark arrived, his expression grim. He handed me the thick envelope I had asked him to retrieve from my filing cabinet. Inside were all the photos, the printed transcripts of the audio recordings, and 2 documents I had asked my own lawyer to draw up days before. divorce papers for me and divorce papers for Mark. I walked back into their room and dropped the envelope on the foot of Robert's bed. I looked him directly in his pain-filled eyes. 25 years of marriage ends here, Robert. You will sign these papers. You will relinquish any and all claim to my business and my assets. You will disappear from my life and from Mark's life. If you so much as contest a single word, every photograph, every audio recording will be sent to every news outlet in the country. Do you understand me? Robert stared at me, his face a mixture of pain and shock. For the first time, he was truly seeing me, not the oblivious wife he thought I was, but a woman he had pushed too far. Eleanor, please, I can explain. There is no explanation. There is only your signature. I turned to Chloe, who was sobbing quietly into her pillow. And you will give my son his freedom. You will get nothing. You are nothing. I turned and walked out. Mark was waiting for me in the hallway with the folder with his own divorce papers in his hand. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed, but clear. Did you know, Mom? He asked, his voice raw. I suspected, and I found out. I'm so sorry you had to see that, Mark. I'm so sorry for all of it. He nodded slowly, a terrible maturity settling over his features. He's not the man I thought he was. He looked down at the papers in his hand. And she never was the woman I thought she was. A few weeks later, the scandal had begun to fade, replaced by newer gossip. My boutique, however, was thriving. The bell on the door chimed constantly with customers offering not just business, but support. Eleanor, you are so strong, Mrs. Abernathy said, clutching a bag of silk scarves. The way you handled that situation, we're all in awe. I smiled and thanked her, but the strength they saw was forged in a fire of betrayal and grief. Every time I looked at the shelves Robert had built, I remembered the two traders who had tried to take everything and failed. Mark moved into my guest room. He was quieter, more reserved, but he began to heal. He helped me at the boutique, his presence a comfort and a reminder that not everything had been lost. Mom, the shipment from Milan is here, he'd call out from the back room, his voice gradually regaining some of its old warmth. We ate dinners together, simple meals at the kitchen table. The silence between us was no longer heavy with lies, but was a peaceful, shared space of recovery. Will you make your famous short bed this weekend? He asked me one evening, a genuine smile touching his eyes for the first time in weeks. Only if you help me with the lavender, I replied, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. I started living for myself. I joined a book club. I took long walks by the lake. I found a new strength, a new identity that was entirely my own. Robert and Chloe vanished from our town, their reputations in tatters. The divorce settlements were swift and decisive thanks to the overwhelming evidence I held. I kept my home, my business, and my dignity. One afternoon, as I was arranging a new display in the boutique window, the sun streaming in and catching the dust motes in the air, I paused. I looked at the reflection of the woman in the glass, a woman who had been broken and who had put herself back together, stronger and more resilient than before. They had tried to take everything from me, but they had failed. I kept my business, I kept my son, and most importantly, I kept myself.